The Vendorpedia platform is purpose-built to automate the third-party risk lifecycle with 3 core capabilities: assessments and due diligence, global risk exchange, and vendor chasing services.
Hello and welcome to Authentication and Beyond using FIDO and push notification. If you're joining us live, our speaker is in the Slido discussion now, answering your questions. For audio-video issues, please click the technical support button below. I'd now like to turn it over to Anand Baheti for the presentation.
Thank you, RSA, for providing me with this opportunity to talk about eBay's journey towards passwordless authentication. Here is the outline for today's talk. We'll go over the current authentication landscape at eBay and how it has evolved over time. In spite of having several modes of authentication already present on the site, we will discuss why we introduced yet another authentication framework. What was the need for it? We will go into the architecture and implementation details of how we leverage FIDO authentication standard and push notifications technology to build secure and user-friendly authentication framework. We will go over how this framework helps simplify multi-factor authentication strategy. I will also highlight the challenges we faced while rolling this framework out to millions of our customers worldwide and the best practices we follow. So without further ado, let's get started. Authentication at eBay. It helps to set the context first as to what scale we are talking about. eBay has 174 million customers and operates over 190 countries. Given the global presence and the diverse audience base, it is very important for us to provide several authentication mechanisms to our customers so that they can choose what they prefer and gain secure access to the site. Here is a snapshot of the sign-in screen and its evolution at eBay. As you can see from the left to right, we started from regular username password screen, and with the ever-growing needs from the customers as well as the industry, we have introduced a variety of authentication options on the screen, including other identity providers as well. By implementing an approaching of identifier first, where we split the identifier screen and the password, we are now at a point where we can provide more relevant and contextual authentication options to our customers. Here's a snapshot of a variety of authentication methods already present on the site. As you can see, it ranges from age-old password mechanisms to several verification methods like email, SMS, even knowledge-based authentication. We have even introduced login with other identity providers. As you can see, these various mechanisms vary in the spectrum of security and usability. In the authentication landscape, which is ever changing and evolving, passwords and some other means of authentication are no longer reliable. However, to introduce a new authentication mechanism at eBay, it's not that trivial given the scale we operate upon. So what do we look for when we try to choose an authentication mechanism? Here are some of the key characteristics we keep an eye out for. Security. First and foremost, the authentication option has to be secure. It's the front gate to accessing all the important services at eBay, and hence it's of paramount importance. Usability. The option we introduce should be user-friendly and easy to use. The whole point of introducing an authentication option for our customers is for them to adopt it and then continue using it for as long as they like. If it's too hard to use, it's never going to make the cut and just defeats the purpose. Maintainability. The option offered to our customers, it should be easy for us to maintain as well. Why? Being in the business for so long and carrying a long legacy, once an option is introduced on eBay, it's really hard to deprecate that. Even though it might sound easy that why not deprecate it, but given the business we run, it's really difficult. The consumers expect the same options to be available across all the platforms so that they can gain a familiar access to the site. We evaluated several options, but found that either some of them are too complex or difficult to use. It's really hard to find out options which fulfill all the three characteristics at the same time. While we were still evaluating several options to be added to our authentication portfolio, there comes FIDO, the latest industry standard for authentication. It's one of its kind, which is trying to bridge the gap between security and usability at the same time. It also helps avoid a lot of attack vectors. Some of them are as follows. Shared secrets. In this protocol, the server does not store any secretive information. Hence, it is not susceptible to server-sided data compromises. Because there is nothing secretive which is going over the wire on both sides, man-in-the-middle attack is rendered useless. As you can see, this protocol is trying to cover most of our needs and became pretty attractive for us. We implemented it pretty early in the game to provide biometric-based authentication into the eBay applications on mobile devices. So that brings a lot of goodness onto the mobile applications world. But what about web and other platforms? How do we bridge the gap there? We started evaluating options. Our aim was to maintain the FIDO infrastructure and deployment we had, as it brings a lot of goodness along with it, and see what we can use together with that to bridge the gap and make the other platforms like web equally secure and user-friendly. After evaluating a couple of options, we decided to use push notifications as a delivery mechanism in conjunction with FIDO to achieve what we were aiming for. The first question which might come into the mind is, why push notifications? How does it help to secure the web platforms? Well, we could leverage the widespread adoption of eBay ads already in the market. Push notifications are user-friendly and they provide seamless access to eBay applications. Usability is a key factor we were on the lookout for, and push notifications are just very simple to use. You do not have to spend time and effort to educate the users on how to use push notifications in an application. Alerting. It might sound trivial to begin with that, hey, push notification alerts the user, but in the context of authentication, it's very important and valuable to alert a user before an authentication succeeds against an account, compared to other options where user is alerted pretty late in the game. Push notification gives us alerting as a bonus. Let's see the architecture and the components of this framework. First, we have the client side, the mobile applications, which get shipped with the FIDO client libraries. The other side is the FIDO server, which is hosted on the server and forms the other part of the components for this framework. By the way, both of these protocols we have open sourced, and I will be providing the links to them towards the end of the presentation. Now that we understand the two key components, let's see how they help in the registration of this framework. First, the user is authenticated into the application with already existing means of authentication choices. Then the client initiates the registration protocol with the server. It then enrolls the user and generates the public and private key pair. It stores the private key securely on the device and sends the public key to the server. At the end of registration, the eBay server stores only the public key. This is a very simplified explanation of the FIDO registration protocol. Key point to note here is that the private key is securely stored on the user's device. Now that the registration is done, let's see how this aids authentication to users. Whenever a user tries to authenticate on any platform, we send a push notification to the registered device. On receiving the notification, the application initiates the authentication protocol with the server. This step also acts as a way for us to check if the incoming request is valid and it's not stale. Then the application asks the user to approve the authentication attempt and uses the private key securely stored on the device to sign the notification payload. To complete the authentication process, it then sends the signed data back to the server. The eBay server verifies the signature by using the public key stored on its premises against the user account. If the signature matches, the authentication attempt is approved and user logs in securely and successfully on their account on whatever platform they started with. It is very important to note that we use the same exact mechanism to even deny an authentication attempt. The key point to note here is that the private key never leaves the user's device. As you can see, the secret, which is the private key, always stays on the user's device. There is no chance of any data compromise on the server side. It only stores the public key. And because only signed data is traveling over the wire, man-in-the-middle attack is rendered useless. Now that we understand the registration and the authentication protocol, let's look at certain nuances for the implementation of this framework. What goes into the notification payload? Transaction identifier. It's the only important piece of information in the notifications payload. It's short-lived, one-time use, and by itself, no use. It is only used to transfer the state of authentication attempt the user started on any platform and bring it to the registered device so that we can leverage the FIDO authentication protocol to securely approve or deny. The transaction identifier by itself causes no harm because even though if someone sniffs it or listens to it, cannot present it to any of the resources at eBay. Hence, nothing sensitive is traveling over the wire. By the virtue of these two properties, we can avoid a complete end-to-end TLS establishment between the client and the server to secure the notification payload. We are reusing the existing FIDO deployment we had for the native applications and complementing it with push notifications to just bring the benefit on all the platforms. Handling of the push notification was pretty straightforward inside the existing eBay applications. We did not have to do any major rewrites, nor we had to push a separate app for our users to download. This just helps in the usability because customers are already used to using the eBay applications. We can just leverage that and provide them a secure platform to sign in. Let's see how this authentication framework simplifies multi-factor authentication strategies. It can be used for primary authentication. Instead of passwords or other means of mechanisms you have in your application, we can just use this as the primary authentication factor. If you already have established first factor authentications, this can be used to provide as a second factor authentication option to the users. It doesn't hurt to provide more options so that users can add more security to their account. In fact, this framework can be used to achieve truly passwordless authentication across all platforms. The same framework adapts to different steps in your authentication journey and strategy. The choice is just yours where you want to put it to use. Well, even though everything sounds good so far, we faced a lot of challenges while rolling this out to millions of customers worldwide. Different users have different devices with different capabilities. Some have biometric authentication-based security, while some have just plain old PIN locks. We decided to adapt the protocol so that it can use the best available local security on the device. We did not mandate biometrics or a presence of specific OS or hardware to gate the usage of this feature. Backup factor. How do we provide an equivalent, secure, and easy to use authentication mechanisms to our customers when they are not in position to use their primary means of push notification based authentication, or they do not have access to their registered devices? This is an ongoing challenge, and I think there is no one solution for this. Key rotation. We are talking about cryptography here, and the cryptographic guidelines always suggest to rotate the key pair at periodic intervals of time. But how do we do that here? It's not that simple. In order not to complicate things, we decided to ask the user to re-register on the framework in order to indirectly achieve key rotation. Let's take a look at this framework in action in terms of how we implemented it. You are seeing how the user goes through using this framework as a second factor authentication means. From left to right, the user starts attempting the primary factor authentication and gets a notification to be approved on the registered device. Once the user decides whether to approve or not, they see the feedback immediately, and if they approve it, the user then gets access to their account securely. As you can see, the push notification based framework using FIDO not only allows the user to get alerted before any damage is done to the account, but also gives them full secure control whether they can approve or deny an authentication attempt. Let's talk about certain use cases and areas where this framework can be utilized beyond just authentication. Account recovery. The framework helps us verify the user securely, right? So if we are not using it for primary authentication, we can very well leverage it to help users securely recover their account. Account recovery or backup factors are basically the weakest link in the authentication ecosystem. This framework just helps secure that weakest link. Trusted device management. Presence of the keys on the device and its ability to approve or deny an authentication attempt establishes implicit trust on the device. We can leverage that trust and the protocol we just discussed to perform several trusted device management related actions. Step-up authentication. Whenever we have a need to re-authenticate the user or securely get the user's approval for any kind of activity which is susceptible to high risk, we can leverage this authentication framework. For example, transactions, checkouts, money movements, personal account information related changes, etc. Push notifications help alert the user before an activity takes place, and the FIDO authentication protocol can then securely approve that activity or transaction. Continuous authentication. We can leverage this framework to evaluate and continuously extend an already authenticated user session so that the user gets frictionless experience into the application. We need not ask them to sign in again and again at periodic intervals of time. These are just some of the areas which actually extend beyond just authentication, where we can leverage the same framework we just talked about. So what do you guys think about this framework? I would love to hear any feedback or comments on the same. So please send it along the way on the chat window. Let's talk about web authentication. Isn't that the next gen FIDO protocol? Any talk about FIDO authentication and not talking about web authentication wouldn't give justice to the protocol. Yes, we did implement web authentication protocol as well on selective devices as a primary authentication means. The new protocol syntax helps simplify certain complications of the previous protocol, but the security paradigm pretty much remains the same. The private key is securely stored on the user's device, and the public key is stored on the server. Let's see our implementation approach towards this protocol. Given that major browser vendors are now supporting this protocol as a first-class candidate in their release versions, we decided that we want to offer this as soon as possible to our customers. We started evaluating whether we should build it from the scratch or just buy off-the-shelf product and integrate it. Even here, we wanted it to coexist with our existing FIDO deployment for maintainability reasons. We evaluated several open source servers as well, and in the end decided to use an open source server which just fits in nicely with our deployment with some modifications. We also experimented it with different client platforms to understand the nuances of how users adapt it so that we can tweak our flows to provide the best possible authentication experience to our customers. With all this in mind, we are still just as an alternative primary authentication for now. Why? Because we faced a lot of challenges again. First of all, the protocol does not support multiple top-level domains. For an entity like eBay, which owns multiple sites having different top-level domains, the same user with the same account would have to register for the web authentication protocol again and again in every individual site. They do not have to do that with other credentials and other modes of authentication. So this is just friction for the user. Hence, we decided to just implement this for eBay.com for now. Backup factor. This seems to be a standard problem which always comes into picture whenever we introduce a new means of authentication. The same problem about how do we provide and secure an equivalent alternate authentication mechanism to our customers when they are not able to use the primary authentication means like web authentication protocol from their registered devices. Inconsistent experience. Different devices like Windows, Mac, Android, etc. provide little different experiences from their implementation of the protocol. Now, these nuances matter a lot for us when we try to cater a user segment whose age varies from millennials to grandpas and grandmas. Lack of common education and awareness as to what this protocol brings on the table in terms of goodness and security. When we provided this option to our users, some of them were confused as to what is this about, even though their devices were fully capable of supporting the enhanced authentication mechanisms. We need not reinvent the wheel of educating the users with every single implementation of the protocol. I'm really happy to see that the FIDO Alliance has recently started an initiative to specifically address this problem. So let's summarize what we talked about today. We talked about how FIDO and push notifications help provide a rock-solid foundation for secure, easy-to-use, and robust authentication framework. We even discussed how we can leverage this framework to simplify multi-factor authentication strategies. We discussed several areas beyond authentication where we can leverage the benefit of this framework. Trusted device management, step-up authentication, continuous authentication, etc. Are we truly passwordless yet? No. Because of the challenges I just mentioned, we are not truly passwordless. All these options are currently as alternative primary authentication. Even though we would like to be passwordless and try to reach that goal as soon as we can, I think it's going to take some time till we tackle these challenges. So what's in it for you? What can you guys do next? I would suggest that you evaluate your authentication portfolio, the options you provide to your customers to authenticate on your application, and aim for being truly passwordless. Keep in mind, I am not saying that you be passwordless from day one or you have to be passwordless. But if you start thinking from that perspective, it will help you understand if you need to introduce alternative means of authentication like we did in order for you to be prepared to reach the end state of being truly passwordless. It never hurts to think early and provide options to the customers early in the game rather than scratching in hurry when there is an absolute need for a newer authentication mechanism. If you want to experience this firsthand, you can enable push notification based 2FA on your eBay account and see how this framework comes to action and provides you additional security. If you want to get your hands onto the code and play around with some libraries, we have certain FIDO open source libraries on GitHub. We have certain technical and product blogs as well you can read to gain more insights into our implementation strategy. So with that, thank you very much for listening to this session, and I hope you got some good insights into how you can also build a secure, easy to use, and robust authentication framework for your customers. Thank you, RSA, once again, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions if you have. Feel free to reach out to me to discuss this further. Thank you.